everyone, it's Ali. I'm so happy you've joined me today for this card making video. We're going to be making a whole bunch of grungy, distressed Christmas cards, and I've got tons of tips to share with you around using Distress Inks and Oxides and the different ways you can use them, as well as time-saving hacks for when you've got to make a lot of cards in not a lot of time. We're going to make 2 bonus slimline cards as well, with some of the leftovers from our project. So if you're ready to get lots of ideas for your Christmas card making this year, you are definitely in the right place. Let's get started. So in this video, I'm only going to be using 2 different types of cardstock, and that is because we're going to make our own coloured cardstock. So I'm using this watercolour paper that I got from in my Artful box. It's just really nice, heavyweight watercolour paper. That's why I decided to use it for this video. And I'm just chopping it into 3 so I can tape it down to my hardboard, because we're going to use a lot of water for this technique. So I wanted to make sure that the cardstock doesn't warp too much. And the reason I've cut it into 3 is because I'm going to do 3 different colour pieces of cardstock. We're going to die cut these later, so I want a little bit of variation between the 3. That's all taped down now, and then we're going to use quite a lot of water for this technique, and we're going to use Distress Inks and Oxides. You can use both together. I really like the look of both together. I don't have every colour in both ink and oxide, so I do often mix them together on my projects. I'm gonna start with a layer of water on my watercolor cardstock. This is gonna make the distress ink move around a little bit more, so you can see as I apply it to the paper it's really spreading out and making a really nice effect. The reason I am painting on with a paintbrush rather than using like a smooshing technique is so I have a little bit more control. I really want to get a good variation in the colour on the cardstock. And I'm going to do a couple of layers as well. So this is the first layer. When it's wet, you can see it's really vibrant. It's going to dry back a lot softer because of all the water we've used. I'm moving on to the middle tone of cardstock here. So I'm using quite a few different colours of Distress Ink and Distress Oxide. And I will list all of the colours that I've used in the description box for you. One of my favourite ones that I'm using is Rustic Wilderness. I've got that one in Oxide and ink. And I just think it's a really nice colour. That's the darkish green you're seeing on that middle panel. I do really like to mix my oxides and use lots of different colours on my projects, even ones that I wouldn't necessarily reach for, because all of the different colours in the ink and oxide range, they do work really well together. Even sometimes I'm quite surprised how all the tones go so nicely, but I think that's why people love Distress Inks and Oxides so much. You could do this technique with dye ink as well. I'm not sure you wouldn't get the same effect, but you could definitely have a go and try it out. So this is the first layer. This is all dry now. You can see it's softened back quite a bit, and there's a really nice variation in colour there. But now we're going to do another layer on top just to get a little bit of extra sort of dimension and layering. So I'm using the same colours again on each panel. This time I'm not painting the water on to the panel, I'm just applying the ink directly with the paintbrush. I am adding a bit of water so it spreads around a little bit, and I'm just trying to cover most of the areas that are still white or ones that are a little bit more pale. I'm not worrying about covering all of the white up because you're not really going to see it in the final piece anyway. And then the other thing I'm going to do is going to do some splatters over the top. I'm doing the splatters while the paper is still wet because that means they will spread out a little bit. If you just wanted like really small splatters, you could wait for the panel to dry and then splatter it, but I wanted more of like a mottled effect, so that's why I'm doing it while it's still wet. Then I'm going to do the same on the other 2. So again, filling in any areas that look a little bit sparse and look a little bit like they don't have a lot of colour on. These colours are going to dry back a little bit softer than they are at the moment, but they are going to be a lot more vibrant than the ones underneath just because we have used a little bit of less water for this layer. And then I'm also covering up the other panels as I do the splatter just to make sure that I don't mix them too much. It doesn't really matter, you can go a bit crazy and splatter all you like, but I wanted to keep the tones similar in each panel and just kind of make sure that there's quite a lot of differentiation between the different ones, because I'm going to use them to die cut later and I do want them to look different on my finished card. Now on to the last one. This one I really wanted like a really dark green, because I'm going to use this one to cut out some pine needles, and I used a more bluish toned green for this one, and it got me thinking that I really need like a really dark green in my Distress Inks and Oxides. I think if I did this again, I might add like a little bit of black or brown into the mix as well and just mix it into the green, because that might give me closer to the colour I was looking for. But it's always a process of trial and error, and you never know how the colours are going to mix together until you mix them. So it did look really nice in the end. So those are all the panels finished. That's all the layers I'm going to do. I've just got to leave these to dry. I'm going to leave them to dry naturally because then I'll get more of that really nice variation. So there you go. You can see that the colours have dried back and a little bit more muted than they were. And you can see that difference that extra layer has made on the panels. It's really given them a really nice effect and a lot of texture and variation. And these are gorgeous. You could use these as they are as backgrounds very easily, but we're gonna take it to another level and we're gonna go and die cut them. So I'm going to use this little set of Christmas foliage dies that I've got from AliExpress. There is a mistletoe sprig, a holly sprig and some pine needles. You can obviously use any foliage dies that you've got. I'm sure most of you have got something in your stash that's fairly similar, and you don't even have to necessarily use a Christmas one. You can use whatever you like. I did have a little bit of trouble die cutting the pine needles just because the die was really detailed. So these are the leftover pieces that I've got, and you can see both the mistletoe and the holly have cut really nicely with no issues, but for the pine needles there's quite a lot of holes in the leftover piece of paper, so that's not gone so well. However, I'm going to keep hold of these two leftover pieces because we're going to use these to make another couple of cards at the end of the video, so stay tuned to the end of the video to see how I use those. Now we're going to make the backgrounds for our set of cards. Most of the cards in this video are going to be my standard card size that I tend to make. If you've watched any of my videos before, you may have seen me mention this. So the piece of watercolour cardstock I'm going to cut for these is 5.5 inches by 3 3/4 inches, and that's going to go on my cards, which will be 5 3/4 inches by 4 inches. So to make these backgrounds, just to give them a little bit of extra interest, I'm going to distress the paper to make it look old. So I'm using my Distress inks in antique linen and old paper, and I'm just squishing these onto my glass mat and mixing in a little bit of water and just kind of smushing the paper onto the ink. It's going to give a really cool effect, and at the end they are going to look like aged pieces of paper. You can get different effects by adding like more water or less water or using more ink. I've also mixed in some tea dye as well, which is kind of a light brown, just to give them a little bit more variation. And then I'll also use some pumice stone as well later on. So I had a lot of fun with this actually. I just made like a whole bunch of backgrounds and they all look different and they all look just really cool and unique. You could do this with any colours you like, but for this project I really wanted kind of a vintage grungy feel, and so that's why I went with these particular colours. The way I organised my Distress inks actually is into like colour families in a tin. So you can see this is my like neutrals tin where I've got all my lighter colours like my old paper and my antique linen, then I've got my browns, and then I've got like my blacks and greys. And I just find that a really good way to organise them. I also have more tins, ones which have like all my greens and blues in, and one that has like yellows and reds. I just find that a really good way to keep them organised. I do like these little tins because I can always find the ones that I want. And yeah, I just had a lot of fun on this glass mat, just smushing the ink down and then just kind of going a bit crazy. I am somebody that likes to do like quite neat projects, but yeah, this was really fun to just get a little bit out of my comfort zone. If the colours were sort of too stark, so some of the darker colours like the tea dye and the pumice stone, I just sprayed a bit more water on the panel, and again these are going to dry back a lot softer than they are here, so you don't necessarily need to worry about it looking a bit harsh because they do soften as they dry. Some of the ones I did at the start, I just kind of mopped up the leftover ink with them at the end just to give them an extra layer. You can dry your panels in between doing this, but you don't have to. They do dry quite quickly because I wasn't using a huge amount of water on these, and because it's watercolour paper it does soak it up quite nicely. So yeah, that was a really quick way of making a ton of backgrounds just from some plain watercolour cardstock. As you can see here as well, they all look different, they're all a little bit unique, and I love them. You can get lots of different looks by using different amounts of ink or different amounts of water or different colours, and yeah, they're all just really unique, and they do look like aged paper. It looks like this has just been, you know, hanging around in someone's cupboard for hundreds of years, but it hasn't. I just made it. Which is something really magical about Distress inks, is that you can get this kind of look. So that's all of our backgrounds done. Now we're going to move on to our sentiments. So I'm using these two different sentiment stamp sets. One is from Pink Paislee from the Together at Christmas collection, which came out a couple of years ago. And then I've also got this vintage Christmas set from Crafter's Companion. So I've not used either of these before, I don't think, so I thought I'd give them a go. And I pulled some dies from my stash that would fit around the sentiments that I wanted to use. I don't tend to have dies that kind of match my stamp set, so I just kind of mix and match what I have in my stash. I went for some more kind of vintagey torn dies, and then also I found this tag die that I thought would be really fun to stamp on with the little Christmas trees, so I'm going to use that for the Yuletide greetings. So to make this go a little bit faster, I made myself a little template with all of my die cut pieces, and I'm just popping them in with a little bit of tape underneath to hold them into my stamp positioner. I'm not very good at stamping and then die cutting, right, so I prefer to do the die cutting first and then the stamping. So now I can line up all of my stamps in my stamp positioning tool, and they're going to stamp in the exact same place, and I'm going to be able to put multiple die cuts into these as well and make sure that the sentiment is always stamped in the same position. So this way, instead of just doing my 5 like this, I can do 15 sentiments really easily. So this is a really good hack if you need to make a lot of sentiments at once, especially if you're doing heat embossing like I am here, because I think it's quite time consuming. So if you can do a whole bunch at once, then you kind of feel like you've used your time more effectively. So I've actually got some leftovers from this project that I can use on a future project. So I didn't end up making 15 cards in the end. So yeah, I'm just using my Versamark ink to ink up all the stamps and then getting a really good solid impression. I'm using my little pressure tool as well, just to make sure that I've got all of the stamps stamped out correctly, and then I'm going to heat emboss them. So I'm using Wow Opaque Vanilla White, it's called. It's a little bit more yellow toned than the normal white I would use, but I just thought on this project I didn't really want to use anything stark white because I didn't really feel like it went with the project. So I'm really glad that I did use this colour because it's really nice, and I think it goes really nicely with the finished card. Just because there's not really anything else white on the card, I think it just went really nicely. It really added to the whole vintage feel. And you can see I'm just pulling out these die cuts and then adding the powder onto the ink, and then I'm going to heat set them all at the same time a bit later on, because you can see now I've got them all stamped and with the powder on, and then I can use my heat tool to heat set all of these until the powder is smooth and melted. I like to heat from the back and the front to minimise warping. I find that works really well. Because I'm heat setting all these at the same time, I don't have to have my heat gun on for as long, so I can get it nice and hot and then do them all in one go, and I find that is a really good way of doing them a little bit faster. I'm also using my reverse tweezers here to hold them so I don't burn my fingers. So these tweezers, when you're not holding them, they stay closed, so rather than tweezers where you have to hold them closed, they are closed when you're not holding them, so you have to squeeze them to open them. I find these are really great for doing heat embossing because you can not burn your fingers, which is not a fun thing to do while you're crafting. So those are all my sentiments done, they're all complete. So I'm just going to leave those for a few minutes just to finish drying off. You don't want to try and stick them down as soon as they've been heat set because sometimes they're still a little bit wet. And now I'm going to assemble my card. So I'm making a few different designs using all these things that we've made, and I'm going to make a couple of the designs twice. So I'm starting with this big Merry Christmas tag. I really like this. I love the little distressed features on this tag. It's actually a full set of different sizes of this tag. I think it's great. I got it from AliExpress. And I'm going to put some of my Christmas foliage, just tuck it underneath the tag. You saw me put it on foam tape so it's a little bit raised up off the card, so it's really easy to just tuck these little pieces of foliage underneath. A lot of the die cuts I'm using I have cut smaller, so I'll cut the little pieces of mistletoe off and I'll cut the sprigs of pine needles off and just kind of tuck them under the edges, because you don't need the whole piece, and that way my die cuts are going to go a little bit further. I didn't end up making as many cards as I thought I would do by the end of this video, but I did make enough. I did make quite a lot, so I had a lot of fun just kind of playing around with the positioning of these and just making them look like a little bit like they're natural, like they're just growing out behind the sentiments. And I'm using a lot of liquid glue in this video. I've kind of got into using liquid glue recently. I used to be very much like a double-sided tape kind of girl, but I've finally found like glue is better in some situations. So for gluing down little pieces like this, glue is great. And I've got that little bottle there that is fantastic for just getting a tiny little bit of glue on these tiny detailed die cuts and not like spurting out everywhere. They are kind of annoying to fill, those little glue bottles. So just to finish off this card front, I'm going to add a little bow. I tied this bow myself from some ribbon in my stash. and I'm going to glue it on with a little glue dot just on the back, and then I can tuck the edges of the glue dot behind so it's not sticking out, and that's a lot easier to do it that way than to use liquid glue. Liquid glue works really, really well on cardstock, like on the back of the card panel, but I don't find it works that well with fabric, so something like a glue dot is perfect. So that's this card almost done. I'm just putting it onto the card base now, which is craft cardstock, just like I've used for all of the die cuts, so it matches. And I'm going to use my Nouveau drops. These are stone drops in chalk white, just to add the little berries on the mistletoe. I don't use this one very often. I thought it would be really fun to use. These ones they look like rocks. When they're dry, they're like matte and they've got like little flecks in them. So I thought that would be really nice to go with the vintage theme on these cards. So that's that one done. And I made 2 of those, almost exactly the same. As you can see here, they're the same sort of layout as well. Some of the second cards I made in this video are slightly different just because I was running out of die cuts. So we're moving on to the next card. I'm going to use this Yuletide Greetings sentiment that we made earlier on, and I'm going to use mostly holly on this card. And I really like this idea of the holly kind of growing out of both sides of the sentiment, so I thought I'd go with that for this one. I really loved how these holly sprigs came out. I think the distress ink on them just looks really nice, really unusual, and it makes you think, wow, how did they do that? Which is my favourite thing when I'm making projects, as making people think, oh, how did they do that? How did they make that? I'm sure a lot of you guys feel the same way. So we're just going to do a few sprigs of holly and then some little bits of pine needles on this one, and then we're going to add some berries as well at the end, just with, you know, a little bit of colour. I think I'm always tempted to put berries on a card when I've got holly. I feel like you can't put holly on it and then not have berries. I feel like it's just got something missing. So yeah, I think this is definitely one of my favourite ones. I think the layout of the card is really nice, and even though it's quite simple, I just was really happy with it. So that's going on to our card base now, which again is craft. They're all the same size. As I said before, the cards are all 5 3/4 inches by 4 inches. And then I'm going to add a bow, which again I tied. I had to watch a video on how to tie bows, and I literally had to do it like 12 times before I figured out how to do it myself. I could tie my shoelaces, but it was a lot more difficult to tie a bow on from a piece of twine for some reason. I don't know why I struggled. I'm using Nouveau drops again. This time I'm using crystal drops in red berry, which is just like the perfect colour for doing holly berries. I know it's called red berry, so that makes sense, but it just genuinely is just the perfect colour for doing berries on Christmas cards, and it goes perfectly with these little bows. So again, I've made 2 of that design. The second one has a few less leaves on, just because again I was running out of die cuts by the end. So the next card we can do something a little bit different. We're going to distress the paper. So I'm using this Crafter's Companion distress tool, which is basically like a little blade inside the tool, and you just like rub it on the edges of your paper and it makes the edges all rough. And I love this tool. It really adds something to my projects, and I use it quite often. I really need to remember to use it more often. You'll see when I show the pictures of this card and the other one I made at the end what difference it makes. This time I'm going to have all my foliage coming out of the top of my sentiment, and this time I've used a piece of each so you can see the difference. So you can see like all the different tones, even though we used Distress ink and we used watercolour cardstock for all of them, there you can see they're all very different. So, and then I'm going to add a little bow on this one as well. I thought it looked really nice, like a little bouquet or like a little present maybe. And I just really like that. This just adds something to it. And then I wanted to add something else. So once I've glued this down onto my card, when you can really see the like distress edges there, they look really, really cool. Adds a bit of extra dimension to a very simple card. I'm just going to add a little heart with my Nouveau crystal drops again. And you can actually, if you get a little craft pick and just kind of wiggle it in the edges, you can make it more of a shape that you wanted. So hearts can be sometimes a little bit fiddly to do with Nouveau drops, but that would be my tip, is just give it a little prod with a craft pick and you can stretch it out into the right shape. I really like this sentiment, this tall one. I think it's really, really different and a different shape for a sentiment than I would normally use on my card. So I'm gonna have to crack this one out again a few times before Christmas. This one says good tidings of comfort and joy, which just makes me think of Christmas carols, and I'm feeling very Christmassy already. It's literally like October, so it's probably a little bit early to be feeling Christmassy, but I think when you're a crafter, it's never too early to get in the Christmas spirit. I'm going to be making a lot more Christmas cards before the year is out, so you know, now is a good time as any. So I've popped all of my foliage onto this one, and I'm just going to glue this onto my card base. And this one's going to get some white and red berries, I think, because we've got both holly and mistletoe on here. I know I could have put red berries on the mistletoe, but I just felt like that was wrong. I feel like it has to, if it's mistletoe, it has to be white berries. I don't know why I have this like obsession with things being like realistic, even though it doesn't have to be realistic. You could have, you know, blue mistletoe with orange berries if you wanted to. Like, that would actually look really nice. But I have this weird obsession with things being like realistic, which is not. It doesn't have to be realistic. It can be whatever colour you want. But for this video, we're going with realistic. So that's this one done. I made 2 of these. The second one I added a little bow just to add a little bit of extra interest, which I think both of these are equally nice. I really like them both. And then now we're on to the last card from our set, and we've got this circular sentiment that says peace on earth. And this one I'm going to try and have it's almost like a bouquet of the foliage poking out the top and then a little bit from the bottom, which I thought was a really nice effect. So I'm going to add my mistletoe. One of my few pieces of pine needles that were in a whole piece, because most of them just like fell apart when I tried to die cut them. I really had a trouble with this die. I don't know what it is. The other 2 just worked absolutely perfectly, but this pine needle die, it was not having it. It didn't want to cut. I added shims on top, and it still didn't want to cut. So I don't know if I'll be using this one again, even though it is really pretty. It just gave me too much frustration, so I just added all my foliage on. I'm going to add another little bow. I felt like that little gap above the sentiment was just crying out for another little bow. This twine is from AliExpress. I think you guys might have seen it in one of my recent AliExpress hauls. I got a whole bunch of this coloured twine and I hadn't had a chance to use it yet, and I love it. It's so good. I'm so happy I got it. I can't wait to use it on more cards to make these little bows, especially now I've learned how to make the bows after trying for like half an hour. I figured it out. I'm a pro now. I won't be. Next time I go to try and make a bow, I won't be able to do it. I just know it. So that is this one done. I think I'm just going to add a few little red berries just because it will set off the bow really nicely. I feel like if you have a colour on a card, you need to have it in like more than one element. It just like kind of balances the card a little bit more. I don't know if you guys agree. So that's the last card. So the only other thing I want to show you in this video is how to use the leftover die cut pieces. So these painted pieces of cardstock are so pretty. I don't want to throw these away because there's so much colour and interest on them. So we are going to use these to make a couple of slimline cards. So I'm going to trim down the background. So we've just got this like little white border around, and then I've made a card that is the right size to go underneath. So I'm just going to glue the background down onto the card base with a little bit of glue. I'm trying not to put too much glue in between the mistletoe because of the way it's die cut, sometimes the card moves around, so you don't want to glue everything down straight away because you want to make sure you can still fit your die cut in. And now I've die cut loads of the mistletoe pieces from some white glitter cardstock, and I'm going to glue these in the gaps essentially. So I'm going to fill all the gaps in with the white glitter cardstock, and I think this is just the nicest card. I think these 2 cards that I made from the leftover scraps actually are, I think I like them more than the cards I tried to make originally. So which I think is really funny. So it just goes to show, don't throw away your leftovers because you can make something beautiful out of them. So this is all of the mistletoe now. It's been paper pieced back into the background, and there it is. I think that just looks gorgeous. That looks like I made the background just for that, doesn't it, rather than making it for something else. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing with the holly background as well. I've used a different colour of white glitter cardstock for these. I don't know if you can tell, there's like so many different colours of white glitter cardstock, even though it's you know, it's white. How many different colours can it be? But in my stash I must have like 3 or 4 different shades of white glitter cardstock, which is crazy. This one is like more of a true white, whereas the other one had kind of like a pinky tinge to it, which I thought was really nice. But I thought I'd use a different one for the holly. I mean, why not? I've got all these different shades of white, then just go with it. You obviously don't have to use white. You could You could have cut the die cuts from the leftover panels that we did for the other cards. You could have used black, you can use green, you can use whatever you like. I just decided to go for white on this, just for, then I can really make the background stand out. So just to finish off these cards, I've got another one of these big tag sentiments, and I'm gonna distress this one around the edge with our distressing tool again. It's already a bit distressed, but I thought it'd be really fun to distress it a little bit more. And because I've used solid core cardstock, it works perfectly. You can distress white core cardstock as well, and that does give it a little bit of a different look. That is quite fun. And then I'm going to finish it off with a bow. Again, this is a double bow this time. I decided to challenge myself and do a double bow as well as a single. Since I've mastered the single bows, I moved on to doing the double bows. And this is just a little bit more over the top and a bit extravagant for this card. For a bit, I think a bigger card needs a big bow, doesn't it? So that is gorgeous. I absolutely love that. Didn't add any Nouveau drops on that one because I didn't feel like it really needed it. Didn't want to cover up all that gorgeous inked cardstock in the background. So, and then the other one, again, we're just going to do something pretty similar. We're going to use the Yuletide Greetings sentiment and some foam tape just so it sticks down on that glitter cardstock. And we are going to add another bow. We're going to go with another red bow, and then the red bow will match the berries that I'm going to add onto the holly leaves. Again, I cannot resist putting berries onto holly leaves. I know I said earlier as well that I like to make it realistic, and then I cut all the holly leaves out of white. So I kind of contradicted myself there, didn't I? But we can just pretend. So these holly leaves have all got snow on them. So that is still very realistic. And then I still had to add the red berries because it's holly, it has to have red berries. And then that's it for this card. This card is done as well. I love this. I think this is so pretty, even though these two are both made from the leftover pieces of cardstock from our project. That they're just gorgeous. I'm so happy with them. So just to go through the cards again so you can compare the two ones that I made for each design. They're all slightly different, even the ones that are the same, but they kind of have the same flavour. I just ended up with I didn't have enough die cut pieces to copy it directly, so I just thought, well, I'll just use the same flavour and just try and stick to the same layout and design, but just do it a little bit differently. Yeah, I'm really happy with this set of cards. I think they would make an amazing gift for somebody, and I really love these slimline ones. I will probably end up sending these cards out to my friends at Christmas, but you could definitely give them away as a gift, or I just think they're so gorgeous. I hope you guys agree as well. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed my video. If you want to see more like this, check out my channel because there's plenty more videos just like this one. I post a new video every Sunday at 6 PM, so don't forget to subscribe so you'll see future videos. And before you go, give this video a thumbs up, and if you have time, leave me a comment as well. That really helps my channel grow, and I love connecting with you all and speaking to you in the comments. I hope to see you back here on my channel again soon.